All right. Welcome, everyone. If you could take a minute to think about a student in your life that might be a family member or a neighbor or a friend that has done this past year, not in school building, so maybe virtual learnings or some hybrid situation. Think about them. We want to make sure that we're actually thinking about real kids when we're having this conversation. Sometimes when you're talking about policy, you can get in the abstract and forget that we're talking about real kids. So, I want folks, if you feel comfortable, to please share some of the challenges you've seen in your own life with students accessing education or the challenges you see in the future for kids to really get that support they need to learn. And I'll type that direction in the chat for those of us who are just joining. Oh, all right. So I'm going to get us started and I'm going to do a little bit before I introduce our wonderful panel. I'm going to do a little bit of level setting to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing and we're using the same language. So about a month or so ago now, I'm really bad at time these days, so I apologize. We put out 3 briefs covering strategies to solve unfinished learning, and we worked with NDRC to really comb through existing research to find out what really we already know about how to catch up kids really quickly. And so what we did was put out 3 briefs, and I'm going to briefly try to walk us through some of the things that we found in those briefs. Okay. So you might hear me use the term unfinished learning. Sometimes that's called learning loss. And we at EdTrust have made the decision to call that unfinished learning as opposed to learning loss or learning gaps because we really want to make sure that we're not using deficit framing. It's really important that we signal to students and everyone else that this is something that kids can do. They can overcome these challenges, even though these challenges are huge. And it's really no fault of their own that they have maybe fallen behind or aren't on grade level. And so we really want to move away from fixing students towards fixing systemic problems that we have in schools and that have existed long before we even entered this pandemic. So some of these things that we're going to talk about, like tutoring and building strong relationships, are things that kids really needed access to even before the pandemic. So just want to make sure that we're thinking about that as we go through this conversation. So, one of the strategies that we found through the research that we know will really help kids is tutoring. So, we are calling this targeted intensive tutoring, but sometimes it's called high dosage tutoring or often. And so, what this is the one tutor who works over an extended period of time, so either all year, every day, on academic skills. What the research says is really good, especially for equity, is that those tutors need to be well trained. They need to work with less than 4 students at a time for it to really be the best quality, but, one-on-one, as you may know, is really, really good, but may not be feasible for all schools and all districts. And so we also found in the research that a skill building curriculum that is closely aligned to what students are learning in the typical school day is really, really important. And it's also really important to really figure out what kids know, where those gaps are, and where they may need extra support. So, either through some kind of diagnostic or assessment to really target that tutoring to what they really need extra support in. And so, I have 2 people on this panel with me who are going to talk more in detail about tutoring. So, if you have questions about tutoring specifically, please go ahead and enter that into the Q&A, and we'll try to get those questions answered for you in our short time today. So in our brief, one of the really cool things about our brief is we understand that there's going to be trade-offs, right? So districts and schools in this particular moment are making decisions about how to do tutoring and how to do it really well. And so I'm sorry if this is a little small for you. Tara is going to, she already did drop the link in the chat for you all. Um, so this chart really goes through where some of those trade-offs are, where we can do the most effective things and where things may be less effective but may still help. But it's really important to note that schools and districts are getting a lot of money from the federal government right now. So there's thousands of dollars, millions actually, going to districts and states, way more money than they typically had. So they do have additional funding to do things like unfinished learning. The legislation actually requires school for districts to use 20% of their dollars on things like tutoring or after school summer school programs. And so it's really important that they are doing that in the most effective way. So like I said before, it's really important that those tutors get training, or the best case scenario is they've already had training and they're certified teachers. They're doing that tutoring in small groups. They're using a skill building curriculum. Really critical that they're having that pre-service and ongoing training and support to make sure that they are doing tutoring really well. It's most effective when that tutoring happens during the school day. We know that is true for maybe for attendance reasons or so on. I'm sure that you will hear more about that today. And it's also important that tutoring is consistent and it happens all year, every school day for an hour. That's the most effective. And research shows that it's most effective on our younger students, but we do know that that's just because their brains are ready to soak up more information. So it is also effective for older students as well. We won't talk too much about this today, but there is a way to integrate tutoring programs into extended learning day programs. So just want to think about that a little bit. So we do also have a brief around expanded learning time. So that's either after school, summer school, or school during breaks, where students can have additional school time. But the most critical thing here is we don't want to just add on more bad time to the school day, right? So we have to make sure that if you are going to expand the learning day, that you are also going to use the typical school day really well, give high quality instruction and curriculum, make sure students are we're building on what they're already learning in the school day. There's a similar chart around expanded learning in these briefs. Similar things here. High quality curriculum, aligned to the typical school day, pre-service and ongoing training. It's easier to do this when you just tack on an after school program to where kids already are, so parents don't have the additional burden of figuring out summer school and childcare and that sort of thing. It's most effective when it's mandatory, in small groups, so less than 15 students, and that students have access to a high quality educator, whether that be a certified teacher or so on. And the final strategy is about strong relationships. We heard a little bit about this earlier in our last session, so if you got a chance to hear about that, really good. It's really important that strong relationships and connections to schools and caring educators who teach and work in school buildings will be the key to successful implementation to either tutoring, expanding the learning day, right? Students need to feel connected to adults in the school building so they feel welcome and safe in them. And Angela is going to talk a little bit about the work that they're doing to do that work. And that is where I'm going to introduce this panel. So welcome everyone. Please make sure to ask any questions you may have. I'm actually going to let my panelists introduce themselves, so we can save time there. And I'm going to start with Bob. Bob, should I take you off mute?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. I'm Bob Slavin. I direct the Center for Research and Reform in Education at Johns Hopkins University. Is that it? Is that what?
Can you tell us? Sure, we'll start with that. We'll just do a round robin, and then I'll come back to you. I'm going to go to Angela next.
Oh, there you go. Thank you so much. So I'm Angela Jarabek. I'm the executive director of the Barr Center. I also developed the BAR model in 1999. We work with 180 schools across the country, about 100,000 students.
Okay, Alan, it's on you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alan Safran, the co-founder of Saga Education. My co-founder, who's on in the audience in this call, is AJ Gutierrez. He was a 9th grade student at the school in Boston where we created this idea of high-dosage tutoring. So he's one of the rare co-founders who is actually helping to lead a nonprofit that's distributing that high-dosage tutoring work around the country and around the world. We're in 4 districts now: Chicago, New York, DC, and Florida. Our main focus is to serve those districts well and to provide technical assistance to districts around the country as they start to engage in how do we set up tutoring programs? What are the key things we need to know? And what is 17 years of experience, which is what we have here at Saga? What can we learn from that experience?
All right. Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to hear from you all, especially on this really important topic. I'm going to start with Bob, who's done a lot of thinking about how to scale up tutoring programs and how we use the most effective ones. So, Bob, research shows, as I just talked about, that targeted intensive tutoring is really, really effective. And now that we have a nation of kids who may need additional support, and we have all this new money, federal dollars, what are some ways that we can scale up effective tutoring, that tutoring that has that evidence to show that it will work and it can work?
Well, that's a great low inside pitch. Thank you very much. You're doing sports analogies. What we are trying to do, we are working as so many people are with the problem of trying to provide useful, effective strategies to make a difference with very, very large numbers of kids. And as you pointed out earlier, these are not just kids who lost out or had unfinished learning during COVID. These are oftentimes the very same kids who were in deep trouble before COVID. And the numbers are just daunting. And so, to do something very small just doesn't seem equal to the situation. And we now have the American Rescue Plan to help provide money to make a very big difference. As a response, we organized something that we call Proven Tutoring. That is just a coalition of the tutoring programs, of 14 tutoring programs, each of which has strong evidence of effectiveness in elementary or secondary reading or math. And what we're trying to do is to jointly advocate for proven tutoring, because not all tutoring works. I think that's important to say. There's all kinds of tutoring that's available, but a lot of it we have no idea whether it works. And sometimes there are studies that find that tutoring doesn't work, tutoring has to have certain key components. And the fact that something's been evaluated and found to be effective is really key. So the notion is we're jointly creating a website that enables people to look at these resources, to make a decision, to decide whether one kind of an approach or another is more appropriate to this particular school or district. And we are going to be doing a lot of advocacy for proven programs, proven tutoring programs, and trying to get across the idea. Each of us has our own program, but we're happy if anybody chooses any of them, because children benefit. Whichever one of these programs you use, you're likely to see really significant gains. Saga is one of those, and it's the only senior high school one. But we have a number of just outstanding programs, each of which not only had to have strong evidence of effectiveness, but be ready to go to significant scale. We think that combined, we may be able to serve 100,000 tutors, who could jointly serve 4 million children. This depends on how much demand there is, but in terms of capacity, we've been working on the issue to try to be sure that if there is demand for 100,000 tutors, that we can fulfill it with quality and get the same outcomes that we've seen in our research.
Great, thank you. That's a perfect segue into Alan. Alan, can you talk to us a little bit about what Saga is and what makes it different from other tutoring programs out there?
Sure. Thanks, Kayla. If you have 2 hours, I need all that, but I'll try to reduce it.
Unfortunately, we don't.
Again, we created back at the school in Boston this idea of build tutoring as part of the regular school day. Plenty of tutoring occurs in the after-school domain. I think that's really hard to do. No connection to the school. The student may not even be in school that day, but the tutor who shows up is frustrated because they were never told. So we built it as part of the day. In our school, we built it as 2 hours of an 8-hour school day. And again, AJ Gutierrez, who's on this call, was one of those students who received it in 2004. So building it as part of the school day is key. We talk about high dosage. We said, look, we want to do this every day because, as Angela will talk about, relationships are the source. We love this phrase, and I hope that there's one thing people take away from what I say today. Maybe it'll be this. Kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So caring comes first, knowledge comes second, relationship first, content second. And so we built it in a day where every day a student would see his or her tutor, and the tutor sees the kid in the hall a week later, said, that's my kid. The kid would say, that's my tutor. That makes a big difference in the feeling of connectedness, which is really at the source of what we do. We build it as part of the day. We focused on high school math because there are really two major leverage points in K-12 education where students need to succeed or the rest of their trajectory is really challenging. Proficient by grade 3 reading and passing Algebra 1 in 9th grade. At both places, the evidence shows kids have a 4 times greater chance of graduating from high school if they make that hurdle. Proficient by grade 3 reading, passing 9th grade algebra, 4x leverage point. So I say to districts, you're going to focus on 2 leverage points. Focus on early literacy and late math. And going to the chart that you showed before, as you mentioned, it is effective. In fact, interventions in early reading are more effective than interventions in late reading. And interventions in late math are more effective than interventions in early math. There's a meta-study, 196 randomized trials reviewed by a Harvard professor about 5 years ago. So we focus on 9th grade Algebra 1, but Saga generally is not only a direct service provider where we recruit the tutors, and they're all our staff and our supervisors, our employees in districts around the country, but we're standing in a position to support the country by making some products like a pre-service tutor training tool available, an online tutoring platform available, and technical assistance to districts that are taking on this challenge but need a trusted partner to rely on for lessons that they need to learn along.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask Angela a question that is a little bit like the question I asked Bob. Can you talk about why relationships and building relationships is super important, especially in this moment, and a little bit about the work that BAR is doing and is thinking about serving kids, especially now?
Absolutely. So first of all, I'll explain a little bit about BAR, and BAR actually stands for Building Assets, Reducing Risks. So I was a high school counselor and worked right outside of Minneapolis. And after 5 years of over half the kids failing a class, I went in to resign because I said, clearly I'm not good at this job. And the principal was a great administrator and said, it's not you, it's not our school. About half the 9th graders fail a course their first year. If you have a better system, come up with it. And that was the beginning of BAR. And so it was in 1999, and it's predicated on 2 pillars. One is data. First of all, we need to have transparency in data. If I'm the English teacher and Bob's failing my English class, I need to know that he's a rock star in math and not only know that Bob's failing in English. So those teachers have got to have transparency in data. And the second thing is we have to use qualitative data. All the information that we know in terms of a whole student, how do we share that in a strength-based way? So that's our data pillar. And the other pillar is relationships. We really lean into both structures and processes to be brokering relationships from staff to student to student, and the other big one is staff to staff. Because I'll tell you what, that data that gets uncovered, especially when you look at gaps, if you're not working on those staff to staff relationships, then you end up with a whole nother big mess, and you actually don't get the hard work done. So those 3 types of relationships are the critical piece. So developed in a high school, and then incredibly fortunate, we are the only model to have win all 3 levels of the I3 competition. So we went from a development grant to a validation grant to a scale-up grant, which meant we got to work with AIR and APT associates. So we did 12 within-school randomized control trials all across the country, as well as we're in the middle of another randomized control trial with 66 schools, which then ended up as an evidence for ESSA. Thank you, Bob. So we're in there 5 times for math for all students, math for struggling students, reading for all students, reading for struggling students, and SEL. Because what we are really doing is systemically kind of changing the way that schools work, and then identifying students and resources the school needs to bring to the table, i.e. tutoring, i.e. community resources, to really kind of equip things. So that's BAR. The next question you're talking about is like, what do we need to do as we're moving forward? So when we're working with these schools, we're really using 3 phrases. So the first thing is, I love that you're using unfinished learning. So that's our first thing. It's got to be strength-based. We can't act like the students are coming with nothing as they're coming to the table, and or learning loss feels like we're in a free fall. And so it's like unfinished learning is the first phrase. The next phrase we really talk about is unconfirmed learning, which also really harkens to giving staff voice. They've been teaching to screens. They have no idea what they've been taught has been learned or not. So unconfirmed learning really is give that staff the time to be able to make those quick assessments, those individual kind of pieces to gather that data so we know what to do. And then the next thing they talk about is undiscovered learning. To think that the students haven't been learning over the past year is absolutely foolish. They have been learning a ton. They've been learning about how to manage household, chores and schools. They're managing how to have multiple technology, but you have to ask them. We have to give them student voice. So when we're talking about re-engaging and kind of, leveraging relationships, we really go back to unfinished learning, unconfirmed learning, and then undiscovered learning to make sure that we're really finding out who these individuals are. And from that, then we're going to be able to re-engage and move forward.
Great. Thank you so much. So we have a ton of questions about tutoring. So I'm hoping that Alan and Bob can tag team these questions. First, Bob, there's lots of questions about implementation and money, how they get these tutoring programs off the ground. Can you give folks a little bit of an insight in terms of how the cost in terms of getting a tutoring program in a district off the ground, or what districts should be thinking about as they're thinking about implementing tutoring programs? And I think that's enough to start with for now. Wait, let me take you off mute.
Okay. I think the first thing is find a program that has been proven to work and that's worked at some significant scale. Somebody that knows what they're doing, because if you're going to be trying to use these new federal dollars on something that's never been done before or hardly ever been done before, then you're taking a real risk. I think that you want to pick something that's likely to work. Secondly, I think it's very valuable to have the district select the tutors and to hire people who have college degrees, but not necessarily teaching certification. People who have been camp counselors, they've taught Sunday school, that they love kids, and then to have them work with these proven programs to provide adequate training in the first place, and then also coaching, where people can come and watch what the tutors are doing and give them feedback and help them consistently improve their impact. In terms of is this all expensive? I think one of the reasons that people often shy away from tutoring is they think of it as horrifically expensive. I think this is a carryover from the days when tutoring mostly meant reading recovery, which was very expensive, very effective, but very expensive. But there's been a lot of development in over the last 20 years or so of programs that use 1 to 2, 1 to 4 instruction. Therefore, that's a lot cheaper. And then using paraprofessionals and who are well-trained, well-supported paraprofessionals is also a lot cheaper than using certified teachers. And no matter how much money you had, there aren't that many certified teachers waiting for jobs right now. We have a teacher shortage on top of everything else. So I think that it's best if the districts hire good people and then provide them with top quality professional development that's looking at students teaching as part of the professional development, working on the issue of relationships. One of the things that I think is really important is that in very small groups, one-to-one or one-to-small group, you can have relationships between the tutor and kids that are just unlikely to occur in an ordinary classroom. And I think that this is critical for kids who have, really experienced some very hard stuff over the last year and are re-entering school and wondering, school really for me? Can I succeed here? And having a tutor who's there to say, hey, I can back you up. I can help you out. I can, but let's do this together. This is not me giving you something. This is us together, really making a difference in your life. But all of that, I think, needs to start with things that are ready to go and ready to hit the ground running, because we don't have a lot of time to mess around. We need to be able to serve lots of kids in the fall with the best tutoring that we possibly can to see the gains that we know tutoring can produce.
Great. There are lots of folks who are wondering if there's one place they can go to for a list of evidence-based tutoring programs. I don't know if you have that out there yet.
We're launching our website on April 25th, so very soon. And if you want to know earlier than that, then send me an email, and I can send you the a link to the current draft, or else to other documents that have this list. And that's rslavin@jhu.edu.
Okay. Tara, can you put that in the chat for us? I'm going to hand it over to Alan. Alan, folks are asking what are the signs of a high quality tutor? So how do districts go about hiring these folks? And can you talk about some of the tutors you guys have in the Saga program, and what are some of the qualities that they have that may make them really great for tutoring kids?
Yeah, it's a great question. What's interesting about tutoring is it's 2 degrees easier than teaching. Tutors don't need to develop their own curriculum or assessments, and they don't have to manage 5 classes of 25 or 30 kids a day. So there's a longer line at recruitment fairs, as we're at recruitment fairs around the country, and Teach for America is next to us. There's a longer line of people who would be eligible to be tutors with Saga or with other organizations that are really going to be qualified to be rookie teachers. So the pool is pretty broad. The second thing I would say, there's really 3 parts to that pool. Recent graduates looking for a year of service, or looking for a gap year before they go on to what they want to do, professional school, medicine, law, business, or those thinking about being a teacher, but know that they would have a really hard time being a rookie teacher because there's very little support for rookie teachers. So recent graduates, mid-career switchers who have done something for 20 years or so and want to take a look at education as a field, and retirees, particularly those who have some experience in their career that could be relevant to the subject of teaching, such as scientists who are retired who want to come back and tutor math. So that's the pool. And what we look for on the matrix of high content knowledge or high mentoring skills, and this is for particularly high school math, is high mentoring skills more than high content knowledge. You need to have some content knowledge, don't get me wrong there, but you can train up people to refresh their content knowledge. You can't turn somebody from a person who is caring with kids, or can break down materials with kids, or who kids feel connected to. You can't train up for mentors. So we would go on the matrix slightly heavier towards mentoring skills, as evidenced by, as Bob mentioned, maybe they've been camp counselors, or they've been a tutor before. There's a lot of things that suggest somebody likes kids, likes to be with kids. So we look for that. And then the key thing, and most people forget this, even in some of the research that was published over the last year, all of which I've read and even been a reviewer on, much of it forgot not just the pre-service training, which again, we're going to have the portal, and you can sign up on our website, sagaeducation.org, under Saga Services, Saga Coach, sign up to get notified when the portal is live. So most people forget that the coaching in service is crucial. You can't make a great rock star tutor from day one. You make them great, embedded in the job by observing how they're doing and giving them feedback about how they're doing against certain standards of what effective tutoring is. We believe that's intensive and daily. That's what makes Saga a little bit more expensive than some other models, but we know that coaching embedded in the day, embedded in the room, is going to make tutors who are rookies into excellent tutors by the end of their year. So I think that what we look for is a diverse pool. I also want to say that we've been doing this 17 years. Every city, every year, we've had 30 to 50% of our tutors who are Latino or Black, and that's important to us because those are the kids we serve. The teaching force in American public education is 14 to 25% Black or Latinx, and that's not sufficient. We think the tutor pool can increase diversity and create a new talent pipeline for districts. So we're not only dealing with the issue of unfinished learning, we're also addressing obliquely and maybe even directly the possibility of generating a new pipeline of teachers into schools. That's why I think tutoring is not only crucial and urgent now because of COVID and unfinished learning, but it's also crucial strategically that schools look to diversify the talent that's coming in to take the positions of trust and leadership, which is the role of the public school teacher in our country. Taylor, you're on mute. Should we unmute you?
I'm going to hand it back over to Angela. Angela, can you talk about some places where BAR is working really well, and can you talk about why it's working well in those places? I'm going to try to combine two questions. So that's the first part. And then can you tell us some things that advocates or parents or community members should be looking for to think about if their school is really prioritizing building relationships between them and the students in their school?
So I say this, carefully. So we have 180 schools right now, and I would say BAR is working really well during this time. If you hang on to relationships and data, this can really be your guardrails to navigate some pretty crazy times. So I would say that in general, all our schools are navigating this space pretty beautifully for a really kind of bumpy road. I'll highlight kind of a couple schools, but it also kind of shows kind of how we both leverage these relationships and data as well as these external resources. So one of our schools in Fort Myers, Florida, when they went virtual right away, were missing about half their kids. And most of the population is Latino, and the staff got together in terms of relationship to relationship going, we don't even know where our kids are, and we don't know what to do. We can't really track them down. And what they decided to do is actually leverage these peer-to-peer relationship. So they reached out to the students that were connecting. So Kayla, if you were connecting to the school, I'd be like, hey, Kayla, could you reach out to Bob and have him email us or text us or something? Well, within 2 weeks, they then had 90% of their kids back in contact with the school. What I'm going to share next in terms of what happens, though, is because our schools are all networked and they're all talking the same language, they shared that strategy with the 179 schools. So subsequently, all the schools then started to use that strategy. In the same way that we had a school in Boston that right now most of our schools have a pretty high attendance rate, but even the kids that are not in attendance, we're like, we need to know where those kids are at. You've got to broker those relationships. To which one of the staff members said, well, we know we've got a group of kids who are at the 7-Eleven between 11 and 1 and every day. And so the staff rotates there. And so they're checking in on those kids. So even though they're not engaged in school right now, we haven't lost the tether to them. But that type of strategy is what we're continuing to deploy. But I believe the strength is, once again, having this be able to be shared in Appalachia and Baltimore and Florida and Boston. And so you're not just confined to those that are kind of right beside you. So they're both bringing forward issues. And so I'll provide another kind of quick one. Our administrators came forward maybe a month ago saying our schools have really high failure rates. We don't know what to do with these high failure rates because we feel badly failing the students now that we know what they're going through. We also don't feel comfortable passing them because what's going to happen with their subsequent coursework because they haven't done the work. So we have monthly meetings, and these administrators, 40 were together this month and came up with a big list of strategies of things to be able to do, and then shared it out with all of the full network to say, here are some ideas. So I think that idea of brokering relationships within the school, between the schools, it just shows how much talent we have, kind of within the entire to be able to move that forward. So that's kind of some successes. In terms of family, parents, I think the first thing is like, how do you know my kid? I think is like a big piece. So it's like when we get back to this kind of undiscovered learning. So yes, we need to have, standardized test scores. Yes, we have to have those other things, but do you know my kid hangs out at 7-Eleven between 11 and 1 every day? So like asking those questions and asking, how are you going to partner with me? So the families now have been so engaged. They know their students. So how is the school going to continue to be able to make sure the family voice, is there? And I think that once again, how are we bringing student voice to all of these conversations? Because we know we have to get some unique supports in place. I also know from being a high school counselor for a long time, getting kids to tutoring, after they connect with the tutor, that's fantastic. getting them there is going to require that you have relationships established with the school and that staff to be like, you know, what's a great idea? This tutor is fantastic. But to get that linkage made, to get them those supports, that's going to be critical, that we continue to make sure our staff is really getting to know that whole student to be able to remedy kind of some of these challenges that they have uncovered.
Great. Thanks so much. There are a couple questions that I'm hoping we can get to. The first is, people seem really intimidated by the cost still. And so I want to reiterate the importance of this huge federal bill that was just passed. And I'm going to ask Tara to drop the link. There's a link that you can go and look at exactly how much each state is getting. And a portion of that money must be spent on some of the strategies that we're talking about today, right? So we can do things like building strong relationships, hire tutors with that money. There's enough money to do that work. And so right now is a really good time to push on state and district leaders to use that money and use it well to do some of the things that we're talking about today. So I want to highlight that. Go
Can I
ahead.
jump in on the money question?
Sure, please.
It's a small picture and a big picture question. There's stimulus money, lots of money for the next 2 years. The issue is kids need connectedness to their schools, to re-engage them in schools. The way schools are set up is not designed for connectedness. It's not designed for relationship. It's designed for moving kids from one grade to another up the years. We need to build into schools personalization so kids feel connected to a caring adult. There's just no question about it. And the best evidence of the way to do that, as Bob has researched, Saga has demonstrated, is to build tutoring in the day. My dream here is that with this big input of money, and it shouldn't be a question of cost now, we demonstrate that tutoring is effective for kids widely in this country. And then during these next 2 years, before the fiscal cliff that may occur after this funding stream ends, before that happens, schools start to say, and parents start to demand, that school schedules need to change, the talent pipeline needs to change, and the budget needs to change in schools so that they can build systemic change into school at this time, which school then becomes a place for personalization as well as for traditional ideas. But this is an opportunity for us to make a difference for kids now, and if schools then change based on the evidence, make a difference for the long run.
Thanks so much for that. And there's another question about family engagement. Is there a way to get parents engaged with the tutoring process? What are some good examples of that, and what does that look like to make sure? I don't know if people are worried about parents tutoring at home or how they can learn more about their tutors, but a lot of folks want to know about that connectedness between families and their tutoring.
I have three thoughts on that, if you don't mind. So one is this training portal that I talked about going up May 1st. Parents can go through that too and get trained on what would it look like to be an effective tutor. We talk about three things: relationships, rigor, meaning how do you structure an effective tutorial, and ratio. What's the time the tutor talks and works versus the time the student works productively. So we'd love to encourage parents to go through that. The second thing is we, as part of our program, we connect our tutors with parents at least once a month by whatever means the parent wants. And it's typically, parent gets a call from school, it's usually bad. We say, look, there's nothing bad. I'm just telling you, I had a great day with Kayla today. She was tremendous. Or another parent, Angela didn't come to school today. I just missed her so much. There's not a punitive tone to it. There's a caring tone. We build trust and relationship with parents, and that really serves the parent's feeling of connection to the school and the parent's support for getting the kid to show up at tutoring. The third thing is, I said it earlier, parents need to demand more of their schools. They need to demand that the school knows their child. Someone is connecting to their child, and schools need to think about how should they structure their budget, their schedule, and their human capital, their people, to make that possible for all kids. I think those are three important things to think about in terms of.
Did you want to follow up, Bob? Or?
Yeah, one thing that I think is really important is to provide information to parents about the rapid progress that their kids are making. Oftentimes in tutoring, you're working with kids who are significantly behind. That almost defines the category. And so they have lost motivation. They've lost hope. They've lost a sense that school is something for them. In tutoring, you can turn that around, and you can turn it around relatively quickly. But if the parent is not, kind of getting the news, then I think you're leaving on the table something, the most powerful thing that you could have, which is the parent seeing and saying, dang, you are really making major progress here. 1 week ago, you could not do that thing. Now you can. The potential here is enormous. I'm standing there to support what's going on. And rather than, I mean, you can have some parents are willing to be tutors, and you can enlist them in that way. And there's some programs that put an emphasis on that. And that's great if you can do it. But I think every parent can encourage and give their kids a sense that this year things are different. This year you are going to be able to do amazing things, and I'm just so proud of you and so eager to see the progress that you're going to be making. But that only happens if you make the connection to parents, because they won't automatically find this out.
Can you all, I'm just going to throw this one out there, and anyone just raise your hand and I'll take you off mute. Can you talk a little bit about how we balance tutoring and the academic aspect of this moment with enrichment activities and the other wraparound supports that students may be needing right now? Who wants to go for it? Okay, everybody, great. I'll start with Alan.
I thought we could all speak at once, Kayla, just to accomplish more. So I'll take a piece of that. So people say tutoring academic. Let's talk about tutoring as connecting to kids, having fun with kids, building relationships with kids. Kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. You spend the first 12 days of a 180-day school year building relationship with kids, not talking about math. So let's consider tutoring not in a silo called academic only. It is academic, but it's about relationship, caring, and trusting first.
Go ahead, Angela.
Yes, I'm going to echo a bit there. I think that once again, tutoring and enrichment, I don't know that we need to necessarily delineate those two things as being in opposition, if that makes sense. I mean, you have an individual who is making sure that you are learning at an individual rate. So how that looks, because I often look at, like when you look at, students in college who are taking very advanced courses, they get a tutor. So like even reframing what a tutor is, I go back to when I was a counselor, I'm like, you know what, those AP calculus kids had tutors. And that is an admirable thing. So I think that once again, having that frame of a tutor as someone to accelerate your individual learning, and that is about an individual thriving. I think that once again, if we can continue to do that, just like we're doing kind of the unfinished learning, that tutoring is not because you're not smart. Tutoring is we are meeting you where you're at and we're accelerating you, regardless if you are an honor student or a student right now that we're just kind of moving to grade level. That individual service is an incredible kind of tool to be able to have you be leveraged.
Great. We just got a really good question, or two questions, and I'm going to try to combine them. And I think maybe Bob and Allie might want to answer these questions. So one is, how do tutors collaborate with teachers, and what type of content do tutors use? And the follow-up to that question is, how do we make tutoring a part of the school day? And I'll just say one way to do that is double blocking. There is a really good research out of Florida that they both did that well in some places and not so well in some places. So you can do double blocking or create a block during the school day that is just for students to receive that tutoring. And if you offer tutoring to all students in the school, there's a way to do that without the stigma that is sometimes attached, like Angela was just talking about. So Alan and Bob, I'll throw that over to you, those three questions that we just got.
So how do tutors collaborate with the teachers? We have a Saga staff member, traditionally a veteran teacher, who's our school site director, who oversees and gives feedback to the tutors. That person is also the liaison to the teachers, which means a team of 10 tutors not besieging the teacher. It's better to centralize that into one. So we have a point person for that. And in terms of scheduling, high schools, typically it's an elective period or it's a double block period. Middle schools, you schedule by cohorts of kids. Elementary school, I think in some degree, you pull out kids from a larger class, perhaps guided reading time. The teacher then has a smaller group of kids to do guided reading, and the tutors are tutoring the other half of the room on guided reading, and then can switch days. So all kids get the benefit of tutoring, and it benefits the teachers' conditions of the classroom as
well. Bob, do you want to add on to that, folks? Or I don't know if you want to talk. Okay, go ahead.
I think it is really important to for the tutors to be catching up with the classroom teachers of the same kids, to look at the data. One of the things that happens sometimes is that the kids in tutoring make astonishing gains, but the classroom teacher doesn't know that. So the classroom teacher is keeping them working on the baby stuff that they were doing before, which they didn't need then, and they need even less now. I think that that having a close connection in terms of what is expected, what is the classroom teacher expects, and how can the tutor can move the kid in the direction to make the kid a fully functioning member of the class at the level that the rest of the class is working, which is where in fact they're headed. But it's so important, I think, to have that connection directly between the tutor and the teacher. But otherwise, I think that the material for tutoring, in a way, it falls into two categories. There are kids who are just a little bit behind, where you really, they're in the regular classroom program and they're getting tutoring to help them succeed in the regular classroom program, and that's terrific. Then you know what the curriculum is, because it basically is the curriculum for everyone else. But there are an awful lot of kids who are 2, 3, 4 years below grade level. For those kids, they need more structured, intensive instruction that's a step-by-step progression. A lot of kids in reading in particular fail because they never got phonics seriously. They never got it solidly. And so that you've got, we just did a project with 6th graders who were very far behind here in Baltimore. And we found that if you just went very rapidly to teach them to phonics and sound blending and learning comprehension strategies and fluency, they made astonishing gains. Like the average for those kids who started very low was about 3 grade levels. And it's just that they missed the phonics that the other kids happened to get at in 1st, 2nd grade. They just missed it, but it's very easy to get them to a high level in that, and then get close to grade level and start working on the different kind of tutoring that's more in connection with the grade level content.
All right. You all, I'm so sorry, but we ran out of time. I really tried to pack those questions in there. Huge thank you to this wonderful panel. They have a wealth of knowledge, as you can see. Wonderful panel. Thank you so much. And thank you all for the many questions you put in the chat. I tried my best to get to them all. I hope you all learned something. Please push on your districts and your states to really do the work, to really offer students the opportunity to really learn through tutoring or have those strong relationships with folks. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Thanks, Bob.
Well, thank you. Very good job.